Welcome to today's Industry Insight with our guest speaker, Nassima Dzair, who will be talking to us about business, social impact, and sustainability. Nassima Dzair is the founder and CEO of InterBridge, a social startup that educates youth into becoming impact agents and provides companies and governments with Gen Z insights. She's a social innovator that is passionate about working for positive social impact and sustainable solutions. Hello, Nassima. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The
Thank you
floor is
so
all
much.
yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to speak to the students, and it's really nice to see such a high attendance. And we're doing our best with digital interaction, but I really invite you to ask questions, to participate, and to really get the maximum out of this interaction today. So we are going to speak about business, social impact, and sustainability, and the main focus is on social entrepreneurship. So as Paloma said, I'm the CEO and founder of InterBridge, that is a startup that is right now located in Scandinavia, but started in North Africa, and that really has a global mindset. So as Paloma said, we focus on Gen Z. I will go further into how we work and what we do exactly. But, I remember how it was to be a student. I sat one day just the way you're sitting, getting a lot of knowledge. So I wanted to share with you the journey towards becoming a social entrepreneur. So I want to share a little bit with you, and I'm starting with revealing a horrible picture from when I was a child, but going all the way back to upbringing, to how it was to be a student and the experiences that led to social entrepreneurship. Because nothing never happens without a reason, and there's always a red thread in someone's story and someone's passions that bring them to something. So shortly about my upbringing, I'm a daughter of immigrants that are from North Africa, Algeria specifically, born and raised in Oslo, Norway, and went to a French private school with a lot of international students in it. So from a very early age, I had several languages on top of my head, several cultures to relate to, and also had to experience the difference when it comes to how society treats you, depending on your identity, depending on who your parents are, where they are from, their social status, where you live. And this became very apparent to me already from a very, very young age, I think already down at kindergarten. And these are the experiences that forges us. So I can speak of the negative experiences in regards to discrimination, racism, injustice, and other bigger terminology. However, I also want to underline how that was the backbone to what has become the biggest strength today. And it's a switch in the fact that when you are met with injustice at such an early age, you have to work harder, you have to create yourself from basically nothing, and you have to prove your worth in a society that doesn't necessarily see it. So my upbringing brought me to understand that without studies, I wasn't going to have the future that I wished for myself. And I was very curious about understanding the human body. And my mindset at that time was that medicine was the way to go. So my study started with medical studies. I was very curious about how to both heal the body, but also look into health systems and how they affect us. And while studying, I really found out that I had a bigger passion towards health system advocacy and understanding more of the larger picture with how policy making, how you contribute to resources in healthcare system and how that affects the individual. And that was the very, very first encounter on how you can have an effect on the individual just by, for example, having a patient that comes in with symptoms. and also how you can affect a hospital system and how you can affect policy. And that was the beginning of a bigger journey. Then there was also a passion that I had for human rights and for how health and human rights was related. And that was the start of a career within the NGO world. And it brought me to do a lot of advocacy work, to do a lot of leadership trainings for medical students and then other students, and also to be involved in direct work on the field with refugee camps and other. And that led me to a switch in the middle of my medical studies that was wanting to understand better how the world functioned, because when I was in these positions, I was basically advocating in front of the UN, participating to these high-level meetings that had to do with policy change. And at the same time, I was in med school where I had to pass my exams, and the only thing my professors were thinking about was the next internship or, the next exam. So I was facing this big dilemma after having a bachelor's in medicine of, am I going to go the traditional way, or am I going to do a master's within international relations that's going to somewhat give me the knowledge that I'm lacking and that I'm really wanting to have to do more of the global work? So long story short, and not an easy decision, I went for a master's in international relations, and it's linked to the UN University for Peace and a university in Austria that works also with UNESCO. And all of this started becoming the red thread in between disciplines that are quite different from each other, but where I was seeing that there was really a bridge to create social impact, and that I couldn't do one without the other. So untraditional study path that led me to many, many experiences. For example, one of them was to speak in front of TEDx, the first one being in Algiers, and then there has been several in Oslo. And the one in Algiers was very interesting because I had this clear idea of a social problem that was that the youth did not have access to the tools to really create social impact in their country. And that the school system does not offer the tools that are needed for the future. And there aren't really any agencies or stakeholders that are supporting the youth in this. So it wasn't the talk itself that did the difference. It was actually the networking afterwards with some of the sponsors. I came in, and mind you, I have grown up in Norway. So I am in the country of origin of my parents. I am presenting ideas about social innovation and the future, but I don't necessarily have the cultural codes at that moment. So I'm basically, in also being a woman and very young at that time, challenging older men on what they are actually doing for the future of their youth. And that challenge was probably very bold and culturally perhaps inappropriate, but also the reason why it created the spark. And I was then asked for what was the solution to the issue that I was presenting. And I basically pitched the idea of leadership academies for youth and bringing knowledge from abroad to the country instead of having a mass diaspora of the best talents and not retaining them to create social innovation locally. And that was how I became a social entrepreneur, because this idea suddenly had backing, it had funding, it was a seed idea, but it was the start of creating a business. And if you had asked me earlier when I was a student, would you know that that would be the path you would take? I would actually respond, no. There was nothing that I had planned per se, but really the continuation of several events and several choices that led to that. And that's basically also how I started understanding social entrepreneurship, and I'll tell you more about it. Paloma in the beginning explained a little bit how we work, but I'm gonna go through it again. So we in InterBridge have a focus on education. We're an educational platform for leaders of social change, and the one we target specifically are youth. In the very beginning, it was in a wider age group, but we had to narrow it down to the youngest ones. And we work with teenagers from 12 to 18, and then we have alumni that are up to 23, 24 now. And they go through an academy, and at the end of that academy, they become impact agents. And I'm going to take you a little bit through some of the phases of that academy. And really, what this educational platform does is that it creates a link between personal development and societal development. And we also create a bridge for these young people to actually have a voice in closed decision-making rooms where they usually would not have access. And we had to create an innovative business model for all of this to work. But first, I want to take you through this journey of personal development towards societal development. So the stages, even of the modules that we have in our academy, starts with the self, goes to relations, then widens to society, and then we look at how it's all interconnected. So the first step, and here you get to see all the impact agents that have been through the academy in Norway. This is the class of Norway. The first step with the personal development and the self is really about self-confidence, about identity, and about having a reflection on values and strength. And I think this is really important because I remember that even though I was privileged in the educational choices that I took, and even if I was a hardworking student and that opened a lot of doors, at some point when I arrived to leadership positions, I was offered more personal development, more tools, more growth. And I was thinking to myself the entire time, how come no one taught us this at school when we were 12, 13 years old, insecure, not knowing what the next step is, and really needing this? And this is universal because every teenager is insecure. Every teenager goes through, who am I? What am I good at? What am I going to become? And also, mind you that school, the way it is now, has a curriculum that actually does not fulfill the needs of the work market that is developing right in front of our eyes. And even the World Economic Forum has a study about what are the different characteristics and qualities that an employer is looking in an employee. And none of those are things we learn in school. And those are, for example, problem solving, being able to take decision quickly, being proactive, being resilient, being a solution maker, understanding social responsibility, being very good at communication. And you guys seem like a very diverse group from different countries, but neither of the educational systems I know actually cater to this. So this educational platform is really meant to cover all these elements, to give that to the youth at an early age to create the biggest impact possible. So the youth start with interactive exercises and really looking into what are their qualities and, you know, creating an environment of solidarity and trust so they grow into these qualities more and more. The second module is relations. And here it's very important for us to put an aspect and give tools on how do you problem solve practically. So they actually learn things from peace studies, as in how do you solve an argument? How do you use rhetorics to speak in front of a crowd? How do you create a short speech? How do you get yourself heard? And they learn even something that is called the giraffe language, or the non-violent communication. And I urge you all to look at it if you can, which is a method to really get your point across in a non-violent way and create dialogue. And also the interesting part with this module is that we bring together youth from diverse backgrounds. They are all from different areas in town, which means different social classes. They would usually not interact with each other because you go to the school that is close to where you live. And that is already a social demographic that divides the city in social classes, ethnic groups, and already create divides at a very young age. So by creating bridges already then, we see that the youth benefit from learning from each other, learning about their different, both, cultures, but also social backgrounds. And they become a network for each other at a very young age. And this creates also a validation for more understanding instead of, quite high apprehension or fear or not enough information about the other. And otherhood keeps on growing the more the groups do not interact, which can then become in society really what we call, the fact that we get discrimination, that we get racism, that we have people who fall outside of society in different social issues. And also what happens is that society doesn't mentor this at an early age. So often it becomes these huge issues that also become political that need to be fixed at the very end of the journey, instead of having and here comes the medical background, having a preventive way of looking at it. And so instead of treating symptoms and looking at policy and budget, you start at an early age and you create another alternative. All right. And so the third module is about the sustainable future. And the youth dive into what are the social issues that they are passionate about, that they care about, and they look into how to solve them together. So then you already get impact agents that are in action, talking about the solutions to different problems they care of. And here a lot comes up. It can be gender equality, it can be refugees, it can be poverty, it can be education. We're going to go more into it, but these are some of the subjects that the teens are bringing up. All right, and the very last one, they have exercises that are about the future, and they get platforms to understand how to build a city. And they even look into subjects that I personally never had until I got to university, about urban design, participatory methods, how they can raise their voices in different platforms so that they can actually have an influence. And here comes the politicians and the private companies that we work with that are actually curious about what the youth are thinking and are implementing them in how they work. All right. And before I move more into how we do that, I just want to ask you if there are any questions that came up just in this Leadership Academy journey.
There aren't any specific questions in the chat, just comments that everything is clear and that it was a great initiative.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your comments, guys. So with the years of doing this and focusing specifically on youth as the target group that we had, we saw that the stakeholders around was governments and private companies and other social entrepreneurs and different spheres like conferences about sustainability, where this was important. But working with this now for 5 years, what happened is that we became more specific on the value of Gen Z insights. And really, we started seeing that, you know, governments talk a lot about the future and the needed changes. Companies talk a lot about strategies and how to implement certain changes. But we saw that there was a long way between what they said and what they did. So from talk to action, very, very long distance. And often having decision makers that are all over 50, all of a certain demographic, and very often male, didn't help in not being close to what is actually happening on the ground. So the way we enter this, this spectrum is by pointing out that in order to innovate, in order to really be ready for the changes of the future, you need to include the Gen Z insights. And by that, what is really interesting also with the Corona crisis, especially coming from Scandinavia, where we are financially privileged, we are often very avant-garde in speaking of gender equality and social matters, but we're also so comfortable that change isn't something that necessarily happens. We love talking about it, but we don't necessarily do it. And that's why it's very interesting for me to make a comparison from working in North Africa, Middle East, and also a bit on the African continent, where the need for change is something that is palpable in the population, versus countries that are more comfortable where we know we need it, but we don't necessarily do the steps to do it. So the interesting thing with the Corona crisis is that it was an actual business opportunity, because suddenly all the very comfortable businesses went from being comfortable to having to adapt to a crisis and to having to ask questions about how do we stay relevant in the future? How do we produce products and services that are relevant for the future? And this created actually a huge market opportunity that we obviously used and started bringing the youth to companies that wanted to test their ideas, to wanted to get to know the next generation better, because they're reevaluating everything, the future of the workplace, the future of what kind of employee they will have in front of them, how suddenly being agile was on the lips of absolutely everyone, creating agile teams. And here we were with youngsters that already have those elements. And also, if I can quickly give you the definition that we have for impact agent, it's really to embody the qualities of being proactive, being resilient, being agile, being a bridge builder, and being socially responsible. And here, these agents could suddenly come and have an influence on quite set mentalities in very powerful entities like big private companies, boardrooms, and government. All right. This goes from the story that I'm telling you about the social impact within my company, with the youngsters that we have, to social impact in general, and also with a closer look at what are the different stakeholders. So obviously, when you are in social entrepreneurship, you're really in the cross line of many different stakeholders, and you work in some sort of in-between. And to make a parallel to my identity and the journey to social entrepreneurship, being in between cultures, being in between languages, being in between different fields of interest while studying kind of naturally brought me to being in between different stakeholders as well. So by looking at social impact, it's really at the center of the public sector with government and government entities, the private sector, and then the plural sector that is often the NGO sector or educational platform. And then you get to have a fourth one that often kind of works with all of them or some of them, which is social enterprises and social businesses. So I hope this can give a bit of an outlook. All right. And so to explain a little bit about how you remain a business model and an enterprise while working for social impact. Now we're going to touch upon a bit of theory, but I really want to introduce to you the concept of the triple bottom line. Can you please tell me if you're already familiar with it?
Heard of it.
Not
Raise
really.
hands. Okay, no, that's good. So the triple bottom line is a concept that a business writer called John Elkington coined for the first time in 1994. So as a baseline for businesses, the bottom line has always been profit. It's always been about the money. But by looking at other bottom lines, like people and planet, it suddenly becomes about having businesses that care more than money. So the profit part is and remains central, but you add equally the part where you measure how socially responsible the business is, and also how much it cares about the environment and the planet. And this is kind of the start to what became corporate social responsibility. So a lot of businesses started creating extra initiatives, often on the side, to show that they cared about the planet, or that they have a nice initiative within for their employees, so they care about the people. But what is happening with the triple bottom line is that it's becoming more and more a need. We're also in front of consumers and customers that are more socially aware. And whenever businesses, for example, start creating campaigns about how they care for the environment, but actually the way they produce their product is not environmentally friendly, they are now being called out on greenwashing. So we see that some of the strategies that businesses created to show that they care about these three elements, when it's not really aligned, it's starting to show more. But one thing that is certain is that social entrepreneurs are really based on, the middle of this diagram, where you manage to create a business model that is in service of people, the planet, and creates also a revenue, because without the revenue, you can actually not survive in the middle of all these stakeholders. All right. And the one agenda that is pushing the need for the triple bottom line in business models is the Sustainable Development Goals. So as you're aware of, in the UN, it was the first time that all leaders of countries came together and signed a treaty that we would reach before 2030 these 17 goals that would make our planet better. And they agreed on dividing the goals in 17 ones, and I'm sure that you are familiar with them. But having this at an international level, what happened is that the UN, by having it signed by world leaders, became national guidelines as well. And by being national guidelines, suddenly corporations need to report back on how they're actually making an effort to reach the goals. So what happened after this is that an enormous amount of strategy building around the sustainable goals. And suddenly it became a reality also for fully for-profit businesses that didn't look at the triple bottom line at all, and that were mainly focused on the corporate side and on profit. However, more business models have also shown that it is profitable to care about people and planet, and that, for example, traditional oil businesses are seeing that in time they won't be able to produce the way they have, and that there is a need both in the market and for their own survival to diversify into green energy, and that is actually profitable. So there is also an understanding from the corporate world of how to actually take into consideration all of these elements, all of these goals in their work. Some corporations will choose 2 or 3 and focus on them, but what is interesting is that it actually gives credibility towards the consumer. It creates credibility inside of the company for the employees, and it's really an important way forward on showing that whatever you create on the market has a bigger purpose. All right. And in working with social impact and sustainability, there's the importance of measuring the impact, because I've been working in this field for quite a while now, and there is a lot of talk. And there is a lot of, before Corona, conferences, but not necessarily action. So another way that has been very interesting that now everyone is kind of measured up to is, how do you measure your impact? How do you create long-lasting social impact, and how does your business model actually implement social action? And you know, there are different ways of doing this, but for social entrepreneurs, and this is something we have implemented in InterBridge, is that we follow a theory of change within how we work with the youth and the academy. We have to have key performance indicators, and then we need to have a collection of data over time. And the data needs to then also go into experimentation, which is, for example, these forums where we make the youth meet stakeholders. And that's how we create more results. This is for us, but every company finds a way of really measuring their impact. We also create impact indicators. So for the youth, for us, it's important to look at, do the youngsters feel more confident after an academy? Do they have concrete tools on how to communicate better? And do they get the chance and opportunity to have a platform where their voices are heard and respected? That's one way of measuring impact for the youth. On the other hand, we have how to measure impact for the businesses. Do they, for example, pass the test of relevance with Gen Z? Is the solution, product, or service that they're testing relevant, and is it approved by Gen Z? And also, does it create change of culture within the company? That's also one way of measuring the impact. But that's for us. Every company finds their own indicators. But this is for you to understand that it's not just like this wishy-washy, make the world better kind of idea, but you actually can have indicators, KPIs, and follow a structure to actually see social change over time. All right. Before I move further, I really want to ask if there are questions.
There is one question in the chat. I don't know if you can see them. If not,
I saw just the beginning of
I can read them out loud if you want.
Please.
Given all these diverse experience, do you think you've found your own identity? How do you find it?
Yes, so very good question. Yes, definitely I found my identity. I think I embraced diversity so fully, and I embraced the positive aspects of diversity, and I made it my strength. So diversity in cultures, in languages, in understanding of different fields, and in understanding different stakeholders. And actually, by being a bridge builder, I built a business that helps other build bridges as well. So I think you can say that at age 35, I'm very confident in my identity, and I really taken the things that sometimes society problematize and make you feel almost bad about, you know, or using terminology and narratives that reduces your positive impact in the world by reducing you to your nationality or your culture or your religion or your look, and actually rising above all of that and making them only strength. And this is also how we work with our young people. It's taking those elements and actually showing that by being an in-between cultures, being a global citizen, that is a strength. And you can use it to show the way forward. And actually, this is leadership in action. This is by standing strong in who you are and your own story, you're able to help others create their own story too. And also that is where social change starts, because it's also creating new narratives. So instead of falling into the victim role, you actually create a winner narrative. And that's very strong. And I see that it's very strong, especially for young people who are growing up in a world that shows sometimes quite a lot of animosity and problematizes identity when it's actually something that can be used for good. I hope that answered the question.
We have two more questions in the chat. One is, how do you convince the board of leaders to listen to your students, as it is perhaps inappropriate when those leaders tend to be more conservative?
True. So in the very beginning of working with leaders in different stakeholders, we found that politicians were the ones who were easiest to speak to, because since the youth was working with the Sustainable Development Goals, and this was in different political agendas, and they have the need to understand, because they're often preparing a political campaign, they needed to understand what the young people were thinking. So that was really interesting to see that there was more of an approval and understanding from governmental side, especially because what we did is an annual conference where the youth presented their vision for the future and their solutions to social issues. And it was very interesting. Maybe this is because we come from Scandinavia, and there is this approval of listening to younger voices. I know that culturally in other places, you need to establish a lot of trust before that becomes a reality. But at least in Scandinavia, that was a given from the more forward-leaning people. When it comes to the private sector, we really had to find the need that we fulfill for them. So not make it about the youth. And this is honestly about trial and fail and error. In the beginning, as a passionate social entrepreneur, I did that mistake. I thought that the insights from the young people were so brilliant, and that it was so needed for the sake of social impact, that I didn't necessarily speak the language of the business leaders. I was speaking the language of the young people and of social impact. And then I understood that for them, they started seeing it as a nice to have, not a must have. And therefore, it was also an exercise, because I don't come from a business school, you guys do. I have my background that has to do with the medicine and the humanitarian work. So understanding the mind of a business leader took me some time. But what I understood was that we shifted our selling point towards how we had the solutions to their issues. And their issues is, how do we sell to Gen Z? Is my product interesting enough for Gen Z? Is my communication outwards the right one for Gen Z? And we started with businesses who targeted specifically Gen Z as a consumer. So we have Sony Music as one of our clients. We have a real estate developer. We have another educational platform that has Gen Z, a telecompany. So just to give you examples, and then really the only narrative is their need. And their need is a curious board of leaders who have understood that they have no clue on what this next generation thinks, because they really operate in a different way. They are very socially awake. They don't accept certain narratives. They call out companies, and you guys that follow social media have probably seen it. And a company can have a huge gain or a huge fall in a couple of clicks. in these days, and they're more aware of this. So there's this curiosity of how do we adapt to the future, and that's the selling point. If you want to test your relevance, if you want to test your ID, your service, your product, here's the right people who can actually help you do that. So I talk less about the youth and more about them. I hope that explains.
You have a couple of more questions, but I don't know if you want to go ahead and we'll take them at
No,
the end.
I rather take them now. I think it's nice to have this interaction.
Perfect. Rafael asked, do you see a problem with ESG rating companies being privately owned? Do you think there will be a problem of bought ESG ratings similar to false companies ratings of 2008? And do you think there should be a government ESG rating agency?
Ooh, interesting. Do you have a place where I can actually look at that question? Because it was a long one, so I want to...
Yeah, if you go to the...
No, I saw it. You know, I think the ESG rating is actually positive because it's created an incentive in privately owned companies and also in funds and investor companies that actually care about these things now more because of the ESG rating. And all these strategies that are being made and the internal changes that are at least sometimes more vocal than actual action, but the fact that it's there is thanks to a lot of this pressure. And I don't know if government should be the one rating ESG. Perhaps it's the space of a third party, I think.
Perfect. I don't know if you have the chat open. You can see there's a final question.
Yes. Why do people need training on ethical behavior, tolerance, and acceptance? Is human nature anarchic and violent? It's a very good question. I think human nature has huge potential and amazing possibilities when we align on certain values and when we're given certain tools. But there's also a lot of fear amongst human beings. And that fear can create so big walls that we actually become violent towards each other. Or if not violent, that we don't see everyone equally, that we don't celebrate everyone's value equally. And so we're all part of structures. It's like I usually say, racism is an ism. It's something that has been structurally there for so many centuries that it's not just you and I and us today. We're all, we've all arrived where we are today because of the structures that came before us. So we're standing upon history that is violent. And the only way forward, especially in a global world where we interact, where we travel, where we find each other on digital platforms like the one today, we are needing certain tools to better understand each other, to better communicate, and to, bring forth the potential that lies in everyone fully. I think that's what I believe in, because that potential is there and it's individual. And then we need to overcome certain structural issues that are not allowing that potential to flourish. And, when it comes to tools like communication tools of how to resolve conflict, even if you take it in the relational aspect of just a family, you see how much we need those things. Or just within a group of certain people, more than one, it's enough. So I think it makes us more emotionally intelligent, more culturally intelligent. And those are absolutely things we always can improve. Even when we have the basics, there's more to learn. So for me, I'm very happy that I took the road of personal development and that I keep on actually learning, because it's a never-ending journey. Mm. So did you think about maybe extending this project to African and Asian countries? Yes, absolutely. We've had some collaboration in African countries, and we're hoping to establish bigger ties, and the same with Asian countries. And our main ambition is to be global, but it will also be, I think, in a first step with collaborations with already existing entities. So if anyone feels, I don't know, called or knows of anything, then I'm more than always happy to communicate about that. But definitely, this is really a global mindset, so it has a global potential. All right, so Sean asked, as a leader and coach who trains so many youth, how do you not take credit and push students forward? Wouldn't you brag with others? May I invite Sean to ask this question directly so that I understand it well?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you,
I was
Sean.
trying to like ask, because I think like sometimes a lot of like I would say university teachers, like professors, what they do is that they sometimes help the others, and then essentially what they do is that they sometimes think that it is they're the one who has the credit. I was wondering like your mindset towards like what do you feel when you help those people succeed?
No, for us, the mindset is the opposite. What we really wish for is to see these youngsters shine in their own potential. And the beauty of it is that we measure our social impact through their success. So we are always applauding and happy for their success. And the whole point of it is to open rooms that are usually closed for these young people. So opening a door into a boardroom or into a closed decision-making room with politicians, or having some of these youth actually becoming advisors themselves. Some of them have been recruited as political advisor. Others have been given a spot in a board where they actually created one spot for a young person. After having these interactions, we take it as a huge success. So no, absolutely not. The whole point is, that's why I want to take you back to the theory of it, is how do you measure social impact? What are your indicators? And of course, if you say that your social change lies in creating new platforms for young people, it's obvious that you need to celebrate the success of young people. And I think this is also how it shows you how in social entrepreneurship, if you're very clear on your values from the beginning on, then you also implement those values in every step of what your business has to offer, all the way to measuring what your business does. And this is the very difference from only being driven by profit, because this is driven by people. So when you have that as an indicator, then you're set. And it's also internally. For me as a CEO, it doesn't matter what kind of results we're creating if also my team isn't doing well. It's a huge criteria that the team is happy, the team is content, that the team is growing, that they get new challenges. So this is really an understanding of how to be people focused in everything you do.
Can I have like another question?
Yes,
like,
please.
I was like, since you mentioned about being people focused, like I think maybe it's not only me, like a lot of people will have this kind of problem, which is like, how do you be people focused rather than like profit focused? Like, how do you make that decision? Wouldn't you be tempted to all like those external like factors and stuff?
But this is, again, the DNA of a business model with a triple bottom line, meaning that when you're people focused, you're actually succeeding, so you're making more money. The fact that you're showing that you're caring for the environment or you're creating something for a more sustainable future is feeding the business model. So actually, our revenues are based on this. So even if we were tempted to only think revenue, we would be sacrificing one of our pillars, and so we wouldn't necessarily be making that money. The money really comes and is rooted in a business model that has to do with this first. And for us, it took time to really create the foundations for it. So maybe, and this is why this triple bottom line needs to be equal, is that we had so much focus on people, and it was our biggest circle, that we didn't make much profit. But it was also important because it rooted us in a way that is so strong that now we're starting to make a lot of money, but on the right foundations. And this is also, honestly, the journey of the social entrepreneur. I'm going to take you through a slide that shows you different types of social entrepreneurs, but many in the beginning, because they have this clear mindset on the social impact, they're not good at making money. They have to ask foundations for money. They have to beg government for supply. It's very difficult to figure out an innovative business model that actually sells, that isn't just a nice initiative, a nice social initiative. And here's the trick in social entrepreneurship. It's the business model. It's when you get that cash flow to create jobs and be at service of a social cause. All right, I see someone saying, Nojus, I have a question when possible. It's fully possible.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I have a question. Since most of these large businesses that are actually like trying to solve these issues are huge corporations, right? And they're overlooked by rules that they accorded together with governments, right? How much faith can we actually put in those governments when actually regulating these markets, when they actually have like financial incentives and like deals can go in do like behind closed doors? Like how much actually can we trust the people in power to control these like huge machineries, let's call them, to actually do the right thing? And even if they do the wrong thing, there's no real way to like unelect them from power. So that's also sort of a finicky thing. We'll just have to wait then.
Well, I absolutely see your point, but I want to go back to the drawing that I showed with the individual, relations, society, and future. The thing is, by describing it the way you are, the entire power lies in society in a way. By looking at it from different perspective, you can also take back the power to the individual and take back the power in relations. So, for example, for instance, the big companies are all dependent on selling to whom? To us, to the consumer. So what is happening in time now is that there is a big rise of consumer awareness and consumer demand. So when the consumer shows the big brands that we do not want the textile that you're producing in Bangladesh by not paying people the right amount of money and so forth and so on, it creates a tension within those companies where they suddenly have the need to create an environmentally friendly collection or change their entire entity, or new businesses that are understanding what the market is saying and saying, we're going to create a brand that is fully environmentally friendly. All of this comes from the consumer. So what happens in also having the impact agent mindset is to take back the power to look at one's own consumerism, one's own choices, one's own political, engagement. You know, if you don't vote and then you're not happy with the people in power, there's an issue. So there is the voting process, there's understanding where is power, where is influence, and how can I navigate that? And this is what these kids are learning from a very early age. And what they're also seeing is the power of network, because alone the voice isn't that strong. But big groups coming together and putting pressure is making big corporations now come to us. Can you imagine? We're a small social entrepreneur next to a big entity like a music producer or a textile producer, and saying, we're wondering what the youth actually needs. How can we change? We're understanding that we're not fully getting what the market, in what direction the market is going. This is very interesting. It's really an era of opportunity for the individual to take more power.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you think the people-focused ID can be applied to the individual aspect? How do you be purpose-driven when you need to worry about the money? Yes, I think the people-focused ID can be applied because it's about making money while following a purpose. I think before, a lot of people took a job out of necessity. And to a certain extent, a large part of the population of the world still needs to do that. But there is now, this is why if it's a calling to be an entrepreneur, it's because you have an idea and you're trying to solve something new and you want to bring something to the market in form of a service or in form of a product. And the thing is, you do it while being socially aware or purpose-driven, like you wrote, and making money. So they go hand in hand. It's not either or. I think it's an old paradigm that in order to make money, you had to be bad. Like, oh, the big oil giants would be the richest. We're now seeing that they're not necessarily. So it's more of what are the new brands, the new products, the new inventions that can be purpose-driven and monetary sustainable. And that's the cross field that this really this industry is presenting. And at least it's an awareness, because you can actually sell more and be more financially sustainable by actually following these elements.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the presentation because I want to show you some different dimensions of social entrepreneurship, and it can maybe help getting a theoretical framework around it. Are you perhaps seeing the slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is a summary where I really wish for us to remember that the focus lies first on a societal problem of choice. Then there's how to make a solution, then the analysis of the stakeholders around, and then finally the social impact. So the dimensions of social entrepreneurship really lies in having a mission and being innovative. And creating, you know, strategies that are entrepreneurial. So it's also about making money. Then the mindset is you need to look at the resources. You need to make some risk management. You have to have a network around you with collaborative relationships. Open-mindedness is a must. If not, you cannot really enter this field. And you look at what is it that you can move, that you know that is in control, that you can move around. And then there are different types of social entrepreneurs. There can be local change makers that are on a community level. It can be social transformers, innovators, and ecosystem builders, the one that look at different ecosystems and brings them together. Then there's constructing an actual business model where you need to look at the finance part. So after all the inspiration around how to solve the societal issue, It's more of, okay, do you first start by supply and demand, or do you find microfinancing, or do you create, you know, a pay-per-use kind of business model? So looking into revenue streams and financial sustainability. Then there's another aspect to it, which is what kind of organizational model do you choose for your social entrepreneurship? Some are fully NGO. Other are social ventures that have a revenue. Other are hybrid ventures. Others can find in the law paragraphs that permits to register as a social enterprise. And others are a full profit-oriented business, but that are socially responsible. So there's many definitions because really this field is kind of a hybrid. I can share with you that for InterBridge, when we first had to register in North Africa, we had to register as a business, and we had internal bylaws in order to be socially responsible, because the law there did not have anything that catered for social enterprises. However, in Norway, there are bylaws as a business that put you in the category of social enterprise that, for example, make us, it makes it possible for us to receive grants from the government while making revenue and figuring all of that with taxes. So it's really like country-based, but this is important in understanding the legal format of social entrepreneurship. And then there's, you start your business in one place, you measure your impact, then what? There is the scale strategy. You have to look at how you scale up, how you scale out, and what are the ways to drive the business forward. All right. And with this, I want to tell you that the mindset, ooh, can you see me?
Yes, we can still see
Sorry,
you.
because my screen went dark for a minute. All right. I hope really that the theoretical framework around social entrepreneurship can be helpful. I see that some comments are perhaps a bit wondering. Do the ones who are wondering want to take the word so that we can take away any confusion?
Okay, I can go ahead. Personally, I've always thought about, well, I did take the initiative of doing a social project, but there was always this like idea of the unprofitable project that really scared me and put me in really bad situation that I just wanted to leave it in a moment. So how do you deal with that when you come? Because for sure I must think that sometimes you do deal with this kind of situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's one of the biggest risks for social entrepreneurs because they're driven by more than just the profit. Some of them are so passionate about the social issue that they're wanting to solve that even if they sacrifice the profit, they will do it. So it really is a difficult balance, but this is where it's important to look at the social issues through the lens of business understanding and business opportunity, and actually work with business developers and look at how do you create revenue stream to solve that social issue. Because if not, it's just a form of NGO volunteering kind of type of work. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of things that exist within that field. But for me personally, because I came from the NGO world, I saw that there was also something unsustainable about the way that was organized. So for me, it was really important to be financially independent while working with social issues. Because also, I don't know if some of you are familiar, in certain areas of conflict in the world, there's sometimes the conflict continues for years and years and years because there's almost an interest in that conflict continuing. You know, so you think there are all these stakeholders there that are there to solve the issue, and actually there's so many layers of complexity that the social issue doesn't advance. So having that political, financial independence as a social entrepreneur was very important. And of course, it demands then more than just asking for grants or being unprofitable, because you need to have something within your business models that creates a revenue stream. And sometimes you even need to think of how to diversify revenue streams to always make sure that you can pay your employees and that you can continue the activities. So it demands a business mindset in the middle of wanting to do social good.
I also wanted to ask something, actually, knowing that the difference when you do start a normal business and you start a social business is that you start this social business because you're passionate about something that really you care about. But sometimes, like, the issue also that I had is I manage to make the difference between my personal life. Like, I used to really take it personally, and as it was something that I had constantly in my mind. How do you like manage to make the difference even though you're really passionate about your project?
Thank you, Iman, for that question, because the reality of it, I think, is part of the journey of the entrepreneur. And the journey of the entrepreneur is that you will take it personally, you will fall on your face, you will have people maybe even break your trust. To be honest, all of what I'm telling you, it maybe sounds like a great journey, but those falls are part of it. And you learn from it tremendously, even though it also sometimes is this journey of growth where it also can hurt in the middle of it all, because it is personal and because you do it with caring, and it's not just like a prototype of some product and then if it doesn't go, it doesn't go. Of course. However, for me at least, it became a better understanding of how to navigate different systems, how to better communicate with business people on their terms, with politicians on their terms, with the youth on their own terms. So it's really like an on-field school of entrepreneurship, and by also trial and fail and growth. But what is really nice when you are part of wanting to create social change is that you also align with a lot of good people who believe in the same thing. So this is the power of network, where you have accelerators for social entrepreneurs, you have specific funding in the beginning for social entrepreneurs, you get people on board that are as passionate as you, so you're not alone on the journey. And all of these things make it all worthwhile when at the end of the day you can measure what you've created and how you've impacted people's lives positively. So it's not necessarily always the easiest journey, but it is absolutely worth it. And also because I think it's a field that's a trailblazer. It opens doors that weren't opened. It connects people who usually don't connect. It creates new narratives. So the price to pay for the person that goes first is often higher than to follow something that was already made. But I believe that the level of passion of an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur is actually strong enough to hold that, even though there are times that are rough. So yeah, I would always say secure funding on the right basis and secure good people around you and create a good team. And then things actually do move in the right direction.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I see a question from Moyosore Saka. Apart from grants and donations from funding partners, assuming there was, what other funding options did you explore? Okay, so this is connected to what I just said. When I started off in Algeria, I made sure that I had local corporate sponsors. I went to the biggest companies and smaller companies and had a really strong foundation of funding to go through the project. When I came to Norway, I got an investor on board, and then I participated to different accelerator programs that always got us grants. So we won prizes as Game Changer of the Year and received quite a large amount of money to build the first step of the business. Then we went to Impact Startup. We got money from that as well. We've been part of Ashoka Changemaker, that is a network for social entrepreneurs. So it's really been building it brick by brick, and at the same time, building the business model so that we have created revenue streams for ourselves, and then we are now selling a service. And it continues to grow, which is the beauty of it, is that this is something that continues to evolve when you're agile in understanding the market. So I would say that, but often sponsorship, investors, and also this is an important thing, there are a lot of impact investors. It's kind of a new field that is emerging, but it is a branch of investors that is interested in impact. Some of them are interested specifically in technology, platforms, and whatnot, but others just actually want to put their money in impact. So there, the impact measurement part is very important for those kinds of investors. So the pitch isn't just it's socially responsible and it's a good cause. You actually need to show how you're creating that impact. But that exists. So if it's of interest, it's absolutely something that should be explored. You're welcome. All right. I want you to continue to ask questions, but you know, I want to go back to the definition of impact agent and the importance to understand that this is something that really can apply to anyone. And it's also the mindset that we bring when we enter companies and when we talk to politicians, because it's about taking that responsibility on an individual level and understanding that you can be an employee in a big corporation and be an impact agent. And actually on those terms, you're an intrapreneur. You create change from within. And you can also be someone who works in government and who's pushing for, you know, changes within a department or changes within policy. And then there's, at whatever stage or field you are, there is a level of influence you have around you that you can exercise. And that's really the mindset of an impact agent. And with that, I'm trying to say to all of you that you definitely have you're a center of influence and you can create that around you. Okay, did you find sustainability feasible at the starting point? To be fully honest, the most worrying part was the financial sustainability. That was a code that needed to be cracked. But other than that, the sustainability regarding people and planet, definitely, those were always there. But the financial sustainability, we've been through some patches and we had to crack the code. And so it was relentless work on the business model, testing, trying, and you probably all heard of the lean method. So it was really like putting the product out there, testing it, seeing what kind of comes of response, going back, changing it, retrying. So it's really like being forward leaning and not being afraid to take risk. And it showed itself to at least work for now. So we're quite happy with that. You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any more questions for Nassima? Right now, it's your moment. Feel free to unmute or write it in the chat.
Well, I do have another question. I would like to know, like, did you guys had to deal with some mistakes you've made? Like, what would be the main mistakes to avoid for you, Nassima, in a
Yes,
process?
Iman. Yes, there has been mistakes that were made. I think, for example, in the beginning, my team was made of other passionate beings who had more or less the same background of studies and interests that I did. So in terms of competence within the team, it wasn't strong enough. So even in finances, I didn't have someone that had the finance mindset. So we did some mistakes in the beginning where, for example, because none of us had studied business, we didn't have a liquidity budget. We didn't have, for example, quarterly reviews and KPIs of that sort, because we were all from international and human relations and all very passionate beings. So with time, I would say always recruit people who are different from you and who bring something to the table that you don't have, and make sure to cover all the aspects that are more of a business mindset. And for example, I am not an Excel person, but I'm so happy to have an admin that is. And to also be very frank with yourself about what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and get people on board that are good at filling those weaknesses and creating this team spirit where everyone is valued for what they bring to the table. I think that's something of an entrepreneur's journey, is really learning that from the very get-go.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you're saying that, because actually I always thought that like the financial part had less importance in the process, but no, I think it's a big mistake.
I think it's one of the biggest things to clarify from the beginning, and it can also be what can be the downfall of a very good idea. So bringing people on board who can dissect the idea with you and look at how it is possible to create revenues around it so that it can be sustainable is very, very important. And again, speak to people of diverse background, of other age groups. Talk to people who don't think like you, just to test your ideas as well. You know, the way we're confronting people of another generation with the younger mindset, it's really nice for us to also test our ideas on people that are more experienced, because that always kind of mirrors different aspects of what we're thinking and can cover certain areas we're not seeing, because we're very passionate and we want to drive things forward. So it's a great advice to really have older mentors, younger mentors, to ask people from different fields to bring their inputs, to create an advisory board. That those are things that really matter on the long run.
I was about to ask you for advices, but you did answer. So thank you.
I'm glad. I'm glad. All right, Sofiat has written something. Thank you for speaking to us. I'm passionate about contributing to social impact in my society. Deciding on a specific area of interest has been difficult. Any tips on how to navigate through this? And also, how are you able to get people to work for you and follow your passion? Okay, Sophia, so I'll go back to the very beginning of my presentation when I was more in storytelling mode about growing up and figuring things out. There was one element that I didn't tell you about. So while studying, I was super passionate, and the leadership development part and the personal development part, I was working at some point while being a student with women, with refugees, with people of minority background, and with youth, and with politicians. So that was a lot of groups. And at one point when I was trying to go from the social initiatives in Algeria to a business mindset, I was more of a consultant. So I continued working for all these target groups. And after a year of that, and I was doing green energy in Madagascar, female leadership in Pakistan, God knows kind of projects all over, I thought to myself, there was one point that brought me back to questioning, and it was that I was spread thin, alone, into different target groups. So the question that was my navigation system was, what is the group that I can work with that will create the most social impact? And even though I'm super passionate about leadership for women and also working with refugees, it was during the refugee crisis from Syria, and all kinds of other subjects, I had to go back to what creates the most impact. And for me, it was going back to the question of, I wish someone gave me these tools when I was younger. Because regardless of background, ethnicity, or gender, it would matter. So I just chose very consciously to work with youth and to target that as a group. And even if the methodology can be used on many other groups, to really go in and focus and create a business model around it for the youth. And that's when business actually started to work more, because it was focused. The first year, speaking of trial and fail, a lot of the feedback I would get from people is like, Nassima, you're super passionate, but we almost don't understand what you're doing because you work with so many different groups. And that was a very valid feedback to get. So things became very clear when there was a choice of target group and an analysis of the stakeholders around that target group, and a very clear narrative around the work being done. So yeah. And then how you're able to get people to work for you and follow your passion, it's really to be aligned with what you're trying to solve and presenting it to people in a way that's straight from the heart and really passionate. And I think it shows, and pairing that with knowledge and ambition go hand in hand, and showing that to the right people, and also daring to ask for help. And inviting people in and not making it as a solo crusade helps a lot, because a lot of people in the beginning, they don't trust having more people with them. But actually, it's like the African proverbs say, if you want to go far, you have to go together. So it's really about that, and making people you work with feel, give them ownership over the project as well.
Sí, creo que sí. Bueno, vamos a aprovechar, tenemos la última clase antes de su entrega.
That was fun. I love hearing Spanish. It's really cool that all of you guys are from all over the world. That's something that my global heart really appreciates. All right.
Does anyone else want to have any last comments with Nassima? Are we okay to wrap it up? Nassima, is there any last words you want to tell them?
Well, I just want to tell you that I'm more than open for you to contact me if you have any questions around this field, or if you want to connect on social media, that would be my pleasure. And if there's any more specifics, because this was a general presentation, more than happy to assist you with that. And that I also wish you all very good luck in your program, and sure that you will be all doing very, very amazing things.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nassima, for
Yeah,
being here
thank you
today
so
with
much.
us. It was great.
Thank
And
you.
for everyone attending, I just want to make a
Thank
note
you so much.
about our next session. It's going to be an Entrepreneurs Live session. So we're going to have Steve Blank, who's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, on the 7th of April. Stay tuned for more information on that one. Okay. Thank you, Nassima, and thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Nassima. Thank you,
Thank you
Paloma.
so much. Have a good evening.